Hey, Mommy. Welcome to the Mami Collective Podcast. I'm Paulina Roe, and this is your space, the No BS All Vibes podcast for ambitious moms who know that motherhood and big dreams go hand in hand. Whether you're killing it in the boardroom, hustling on your side gig, or just trying to get through the day without reheating your coffee for the third time, and yes, girl, we've all been there, this is the place for you. We're here to flip the script on the whole you can't have it all narrative, because spoiler alert, you can. Motherhood doesn't dim your ambition, it actually fuels it. And we're going to talk all about it, the wins, the struggles, and the moments that make you say, damn, I am really doing this. So buckle up, boo. We're diving into real talk, inspiration, and the occasional hot take to keep you fired up and thriving. This is the Mami Collective. Let's do this. Hi, it's the Mami Collective Podcast, and it's Paulina back with another episode, and I'm so excited for my guest today. I today get to chat with Janny Perez, a bilingual parenting educator, author, and host of the Latina Mom Legacy podcast. And you're the founder of Milegasi, and a proud first-generation Latina mom. And you also help families raise confident bilingual children while celebrating their cultural identity. And then also you do partner with companies to empower employees on the impact of bilingualism and multiculturalism in today's world. So how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I love all the work that you're doing, specifically because I'm all about, I'm bilingual and my husband's bilingual. We speak two different languages, right? I'm Polish and I'm English. He's Spanish and English. But we're trying to teach our daughter 3 languages, which I believe you are too, correct, with your children?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's like, I have so many questions because I feel like finally I found my people, but I just feel like I love that you, in the work that you do, you emphasize so much of like the importance of it, right? And we're going to dive into it. We're going to dissect a lot of things because, I do know people whose parents were very opposed to bilingualism and were like, no, we're not doing this. People who even come to this country and assimilate and are like, hey, I'm not teaching my kids my native tongue. We're not doing that. We're going to just do English. So I want to dive into all of this with you today. But first and foremost, can you give us a little bit of a background kind of about the work that you do and obviously why it's so important?
Well, I'm going to take you a little far back. As you mentioned, I'm a first-gen Latina. Actually, I came to the States, which is what they call three-quarter first, not quite first-gen, but three-quarter gen, which means that I came here as a baby. And both of my parents immigrated from Colombia. And in our home, growing up, we only spoke Spanish. And the motto in our home was, en esta casa solo se habla español, which translates to, we only speak Spanish in this house. So I grew up with two parents only speaking Spanish. I also grew up in Miami, which is a very Latino, Hispanic, Spanish-speaking community. And it wasn't until I grew up, went to college, I studied in Chicago. I was with my boyfriend at the time, went to school and got exposed to other nationalities, including Polish and Mexican and Puerto Rican cultures, and made my way to New York. And when I came to New York, I met my husband, who actually wasn't my ex, isn't my ex, and his background is Bulgarian. So love story, we fell in love, we got together, we got married, and after we got married, I realized that I wanted to raise our daughter. When we had our daughter in 2015, I wanted to raise her bilingually, and not only bilingually, but I wanted to raise her to also be culturally aware of both her cultures, of both her roots. And what transpired is that when she was around 2, I was laid off from my job that I had at the time. I was working from home way before the pandemic. And I decided that I was going to start Milegasi, which started as a subscription box, believe it or not, for parents, where they would get a little box in the mail with Spanish language activities. And in the process, I realized that I didn't know what the heck I was doing. It didn't work out. I had invested all of this money into this startup. And so I had all this leftover product. I started going to all these shows, like baby shows and mom shows. And it was with the one-on-one with the parents, with the moms that I was meeting, that I felt a really strong connection. that's when I started the Latina Mom Legacy podcast. And then everything has sort of evolved from that, where now it's not just a product, really, it's more of a platform, of a space for parents to raise bilingual kids, whether they want to take a course, whether they want to read a book, whether they want to read a blog. And it's just sort of evolved like that.
I love it. Yeah, no, I mean, like, I don't meet a lot of parents who want to do the trilingual thing, right? And it's actually really interesting, and I don't know how true this is, and I feel like you would know way more than I do, but I read somewhere that, like, in Europe or other countries, it's very common. Like, this isn't anything new over there. And I know a lot of European kids will speak three, for example. They'll speak Spanish, Italian, and English, right? And I don't know if it's because, like, they're taught that in school, or maybe, like, their parents know other languages. I'm not really sure, but I just thought it was very interesting that here it just seems, I don't know, it seems like something I don't hear about a lot. And I'm in Chicago. Maybe in other cities it's more common, but I love that you guys are doing that. Do you feel like it's been easy? Has it been challenging for your daughter to learn three languages? And first of all, too, how do you introduce a third language, right? Or even a third language? How do you do that with a young child, right?
Well, going back to your first point, actually, I just finished giving a bilingual parenting workshop at Google for their employees. And it was very exciting and more than anything, very empowering to the community and to the parents. And one of the slides that I shared talks specifically about that, how in comparison to European countries, where 100%, 90%, I think the lowest country that begins dual language education or foreign language education is like 60%. That's like the lowest number in terms of the country that teaches children from elementary school and middle school, whereas the U.S., we're down at 20%. So only 20% of our population between elementary school and middle school is getting some sort of foreign language education. So if you compare that, we live in a monolingual society. That means that we really, as a country, we don't embrace bilingualism or multilingualism as other countries. So it is very challenging, and I'll be the first to recognize that it is very challenging for parents to raise bilingual children in the U.S. Even multilingual children is even harder because we live in an environment and in a society that doesn't necessarily support, we live in a society that doesn't support that. So for parents that do want to raise bilinguals or multilinguals, we really have to put in that extra effort and be extra committed because we don't necessarily have that support system. So it does become a challenge. I will say that it depends on the family. And what I like to teach parents and families is that every family is different. Every child is different. What works for one family doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for another family. The main thing that parents need to understand and realize is that there are two things that children or anyone need in order to learn a language. And that is they need to have exposure to the language in order to acquire the language, and they need to have a need to use the language. So language exposure for kids means that they need 20 to 40% of their waking hours in that second language in order for them to begin to acquire some of that. So if your child is awake 12 hours, at least 2.5 of those hours have to be in the minority language, in that second language, in order for them to acquire that language. That's per day. So it really is a little bit more than I think some parents realize, or in some cases, less than parents think. So depending on where in the spectrum you fall in. So that's a big component. The other component is having the need to use that language. So in the US, we don't really have a need to use another language, right? Because we all speak English here. So giving children that need to use that language, that exposure to that language, those conversations make it challenging just because they aren't as exposed. So what ends up happening is that you end up having a lot of children that end up being passive bilinguals, which means that they'll understand the language, but they won't verbalize the language.
That is very interesting. And my friend and I talk about this a lot because she talks to her kids only in Spanish. And I want to say her daughter is like, I don't know, maybe almost 2 years, only understands and speaks Spanish, right? For as much as she can speak, because she's only 2. And I've noticed, especially like being here in the US, but like I've noticed that a lot of people, even older children, let's say 8, 9, 10-year-olds, will refuse to speak back in Spanish. I'm using that as an example. I'm going to use say Spanish because that's what I see the most. Parents will speak to them. They understand it. But my friend made a comment and said it's because they are not practicing or they're receiving or whatever, like you said, but they're not the opposite. The other one would be like kind of like the response part. How do we encourage our kids to respond to us when they become, that age or like they refuse to, whether it's because they're shy, they're embarrassed, they don't want to, they're being lazy, whatever it might be? Why or how can we encourage our kids to do that?
Well, a few things happen, and it really starts from the beginning. So what I find working with parents and just interviewing just dozens and dozens of parents who are raising bilingual children is that the parent sets the precedence. So if you, from the beginning, decide that you want to speak to your child in one language and one language only, you're going to be the point person for that child of that language. So if you decide that you're going to speak to your child in Spanish and you're just going to speak to your child in Spanish, then your child will make that connection that you are the point person, you are the Spanish point person, right? The minute that you digress and begin to speak English, then your child doesn't know whether you're the Spanish point person or you're the English point person. And what ends up happening is that once they begin preschool or school where the community language is English and they know that you speak English, then they're immediately going to switch over to English because that is the preferred language of choice within the community. That is the majority language. So the best approach really for parents that I encourage is that as much as possible to stick to one language at home, whether mom speaks only Spanish and dad speaks English, or mom speaks Polish and dad speaks Spanish, whatever that looks like in your environment, and try to be consistent. I will be honest, I wasn't consistent. I didn't know all about this till much later, right? So I would speak to my daughter about 60 to 70% in Spanish when she was younger, and then switch over to English. Now, my husband speaks English. He doesn't speak Spanish, and he speaks English and Bulgarian. So once she started school and she started seeing everybody else was speaking English and that was like cool, she didn't want to be different, then she immediately would speak to me in English. So what I ended up doing as she's grown, she's now 10, is I continue to speak to her in English and Spanish. I try to speak to her as much Spanish as I can so she can listen. But because she doesn't respond to me, she responds to me whenever she wants. I have to make sure that she is getting that conversational component, and thus she has a Spanish tutor. So I give her opportunities for her to have that need, to have that obligation to use Spanish. So like with my family, my mom only speaks Spanish, so she has no other choice, but she has to speak to my mom in Spanish whether she likes it or not. So having those different opportunities for them to speak the language, to have that need to use the language, is going to be crucial. But at the beginning, if you set that tone that you're going to be the point person, that you're only going to be the one to speak Spanish, then I will tell you, they will stick to it as they continue to grow. Even growing up, like in our home, growing up, we only spoke Spanish. So, I mean, my mom is going to be 80. My sister lives with my mom. To this day, when we enter my mom's house, even though my sister speaks English, and when I enter the home, everything switches to Spanish. And when my sister and I leave the home, we begin like speaking in English and Spanish. So it's like that conditioning. So we've been conditioned that when we're in my parents' house, when we're in my mom's house, we automatically switch to Spanish. And that doesn't go away. So the earlier that you can set this tone, the easier it's going to be, especially as the child begins to age.
I love that. So then would you recommend for parents who are doing multiple languages, such as yourselves and you and your husband, would it be then, for example, you are the Spanish point person, right? Then your husband is speaking Bulgarian, and then outside the home, school, sports, whatever it is like the English point. So it's like, should everybody kind of lean into like where they're supposed to be to make this work essentially? Would that be like a good starting tip?
That would be the ideal. It really would be the ideal for the child to have, if especially like, let's take the example of 3 languages. For mom to be one language, dad to be, or the partner to be another language, and then the community language, the majority language, whatever that is. So if the community language is English, then mom can be Spanish, dad could be Polish or Bulgarian, whatever that other language is. When the child gets into the home, they can speak to mom in one language, they can speak to dad in another language, and they're going to get that language exposure of the majority language outside the home. That's ideal, but that's not reality. That's not what ends up happening, again, because of the different families and how we live, how we engage, the communities that we live in. Perhaps you start off with that intention, but fear sets in because you don't hear your child speaking to you, and then maybe you fear that you're confusing them, and then you begin to speak to them in English because you want your child to speak back to you. And so there are a lot of different things that happen in this journey. There are a lot of different scenarios that happen. And again, every family is different. The one thing is that for you as the parent to keep in mind is that exposure and need are crucial. So the more exposure to the language that your child has of a given language, and the more of a need they have to use it, the likelier they are to become bilingual or multilingual. My husband doesn't speak to my daughter in Bulgarian. I wish. And this is like an argument that we have a lot, because I'm like, why don't you just speak to her? And you can't force somebody to do something that they don't want. But that being said, because it is important to me for my daughter to at least have that some understanding of the language, then even though I am not a Bulgarian speaker, if this is my wish as a mom, I am the one that has to manage that process. And what that means for me is that I have to give her opportunities outside the home to get that Bulgarian exposure. So right now she goes to a Bulgarian school on the weekends, and she has a Bulgarian tutor that she meets online virtually a few days a week.
I love that. I love that you're so open to it, because I feel like, and I don't blame them. A lot of parents, maybe if they're going to do, another language, they'll pick one. And I feel like I'm mixed, right? My daughter's mixed. So I just look at certain things or certain families, and I'm like, oh, how cool would it be, right? If like, I know mom and dad come from 2 different worlds, right? 2 different languages, like quite literally, what is it called? The language tree. I know how there's like the base of like the language family, right? Like the Slavic language. I believe like Spanish is under like, is it Romance or something? I can't remember the but there's like different ones. So I'm always like, oh, how cool would it be for your kid to learn 3? But I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous. We're kind of dabbling, right? Like I speak Polish to her, but like you said, realistically, not all the time, because I'm very comfortable in English, obviously, even though Polish was my first language. English is my go-to. So I'm trying my best. But what do you think would be parents who are like wondering, like, should I do this? Should I start? First of all, is it even too late to start, or can you start at a certain like age, or should you wait? What kind of advice do you give for that?
Well, I always tell parents it's never too late. So in the past, it used to be a smaller window, or researchers had given a smaller window for parents as a guideline in terms of the prime language development time. And previously it was from 0 to 6 years old, 6 or 7-ish. Like those formative years were like prime time for language development. However, recently, over the past 2 to 3 years, that timeline has expanded. And now they're showing that children are still able to acquire fairly easily 2 languages up to 10 to 12 years of age. So that prime time of language development has now expanded a little bit longer. And that's great for parents because it gives them a bigger window for them to begin the language process with their children, or second or third language process. So it's never too late. We have to go back to the language exposure, the time component. So I tell parents, the more you speak to your child in the language, the more they are listening to it, the more they are conversing with you, the more that they're exposed to the language, they're going to pick up some of that language some way, somehow, right? So I always say some language or some Spanish. My motto is like some Spanish is better than no Spanish. So some language is better than no language. So the more that they're exposed to it in the formative years, obviously the better. Depending on your situation, you as a parent have to decide what your goals are for your child. And that is different for everyone. And I teach parents my 4-step process, and it really is about going through these 4 steps of really getting in the mindset of raising bilingual children. And one of those steps, actually step 1, is really knowing where you are at, knowing what your proficiency level is. And step 2 is knowing where you want to go. Where do you want to see your child? So like for me, my goal for my daughter was not for her to be a translator at the United Nations. No, my goal for her was for her to be able to communicate with my parents that really didn't speak a whole lot of English. So I said, if she can verbally communicate her needs, express her feelings to my parents, then I'm good with that. She doesn't have to be a translator. I'm good with that. I have parents that want their children to be able to be fluent and read Gabriel Garcia Marquez or some of these amazing authors. Now my daughter will likely get to that point, but that was not my initial goal. So I think it's important that you as a parent decide what your goal for your child is, what your acceptance is, and then does your reality match that goal? Because if you want your child to be fluent, but you are the only minority language speaker in the home, you live far away from all of your extended friends and family that speak that minority language, and you do not have any support network in your neighborhood, in your community to support you, I'm not saying that it's impossible. It's just going to be a lot more challenging. So your goal of your child being fully bilingual may not be realistic. So what do you want for your child? And then does your intentions, does that match your goal? Very important for you to decipher that.
And what about too, and I'm asking for myself as well, but like, if my Spanish is, I always say my Spanish is absolute trash. It's not the worst, not the best. But if I want to encourage my daughter to speak Spanish, right? Let's just say I want to speak with her, whatever, say words here and there, but I'm not fluent. I'm not a native speaker. Do you encourage parents to still kind of just lean into it? Or do you feel like we should refrain because I may mispronounce words? I might not conjugate words correctly, right? I'm not the fluent speaker. My husband is. So it's like, should I just kind of step back, let them do their thing? Or should I also kind of get involved in the conversation?
Okay, very great question, and a question that I do get often. I will say, we don't want our children to make mistakes, right? We don't want to teach them the incorrect way, especially when you have languages that, for example, I had a parent ask me at the workshop that their spouse speaks Cantonese, and Cantonese, and they use intonation, so different tones. And so the spouse knew some words, but because the tones weren't said correctly, they were afraid that they were going to pass that incorrectly to their child. And I said, you are correct. Like, you don't want to, especially when the language is very nuanced, that you have those different tones, and you don't necessarily want to pass those mistakes down to your child. Doesn't mean that you can't be supportive, though. Your role, though, is not going to be of a teacher. Your role is going to be as a learner with your child. So if your spouse, I'll give you the example. So I'm a non-Bulgarian speaker, right? I don't know the language. I don't know the Cyrillic alphabet. It all looks like gibberish to me, right? I understand a few words because my husband, when he speaks with his mom and when we travel to Bulgaria, I hear and I can understand certain foods and directions, certain like basics, right? I'm not teaching my daughter Bulgarian. However, I do support the journey and the process. And how do I support that? I become a learner with her. So, for example, we went to Bulgaria. We are big Scrabble players, huge Scrabble players. I found Bulgarian Scrabble. And so I bought the Bulgarian Scrabble. We'll play together and we'll just use the dictionary and look up words. And because she knows the alphabet, she'll sound out the words and we'll both be learning together. It gives us an activity that we love to learn, that we love to do, and we're learning together. If she's doing an app, for example, and we're listening, like we like Mondly. I know people, I don't know if Duolingo has Bulgarian, but at least Mondly I know does Bulgarian. So we'll listen to Mondly in the car. Like I'll blast it in the car and we'll be repeating together in Bulgarian. So it shows her that while I am not the teacher, that I'm still supporting. I'm very supportive of this journey of hers. And I think for parents, it's not when kids see the parent is disconnected and disengaged, then that is going to give them another reason to not want to learn the language. And we don't want that. We want to open that door so that they want to learn the language. And the other thing is that as they begin to learn, tell them, can you teach me how to say this? Kids are so wonderful in the way that they want to teach us because they're like, oh, mom doesn't know how to say this or mom doesn't know this. I can teach her something. They can share that information with us. And that's going to motivate them to continue learning this second or third language.
I love that advice. I think that's great. I'm personally gonna lean into that because I'm always like, well, I always say I'm learning too. But like, I can say phrases, and I think full transparency, I think like Spanish, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I think it's probably one of the easiest languages to pick up or learn. And like, this is also from a Polish native speaker. Like, I don't think I could learn Polish if I didn't speak it. I'm gonna be so honest, I don't think there's a lot of languages I could learn at this age. Maybe I can pick up a couple things, but like, I won't be Miss Fluent Lady. And at least with Spanish, I can pick up phrases, words, and I can honestly even read something, and like it may not be perfectly pronounced, and I own that, but I know what I'm saying essentially. So I think like I'm gonna do that approach, I think, with her. She's only 18 months or 14 months, but I'm gonna start, kind of like, all right, show mommy or teach mommy, and I'll say words to her too and stuff, because I'm really trying to get her to learn as much as I can. So really quick, you've written I believe it's a book, right? Nobody told me this about raising a bilingual child. I'm going to get that book because I'm just like so fascinated, and I'm really, my goal in my life is to raise an amazing human being, but a very very amazing trilingual human being. Like I'm not even trying to be like I'm so pushy, because I'm not, but I'm really encouraging, right? So I have to get a copy of this book, but I think the title is so striking, and I'm kind of wondering like what people don't tell you. Like I obviously like know you probably like, well, I have a lot, it's literally in your book, and I'm so excited to read it. But I'm wondering if you can share at least one truth that maybe most parents only realize kind of the hard way. I'm curious, like what's like one of the hardest truths?
I think for me, one of the hardest truths, and I speak about, and we like a little bit touched on it, is that nobody tells you that your spouse or partner is going to be supportive in this journey. Because I feel like when you have a baby, or when you have a child, you kind of create this idea of what you envision their life to be, right? But you don't really think about that your spouse or partner has their own vision for their child, right? And you think that, like for me, when I had my daughter, I was just like, I'm going to speak Spanish to her. You're going to speak Bulgarian to her. Like, that's just like no brainer. Like, I didn't even think of it. Like, it was just like a no brainer. That wasn't the reality. The reality was that for whatever reason, each person has their own journey with their language. And that's another important point, is that people don't understand that, like, for example, with Spanish, there can be a lot of cultural issues or societal pressures that come with the language. So, like, for example, Spanish, people have been shamed and oppressed from speaking Spanish. And sometimes that gets passed on where parents don't want their children to speak Spanish because they don't want their children to grow up with that hurt or that pain that they perhaps endure. So my husband with Bulgarian, I mean, I don't know what his deeper issue is with Bulgarian, or if it's just like, hey, it's just easier to speak English. Like, I get that. But sometimes it can be something deeper than that. But nobody tells you this. Nobody tells you this when you just kind of assume. And the problem when you assume is that, especially when kids are like your child is 14 months old, that this is a prime time for them to get their guidance on who's going to speak to them in what language. And if they know that mom is going to speak to me only in this language, it's going to be much easier later on. It's not that they're going to confuse the languages. My daughter is what we call a simultaneous bilingual. She acquired both languages, or she was exposed to both languages at the same time. She's also a sequential bilingual, meaning that sequential means that children are exposed to a language after a certain period of time. So she's a simultaneous bilingual with English and Spanish. She's a sequential bilingual with Bulgarian and English, because we didn't introduce Bulgarian like really formative until she was in kindergarten. That's when she started going to Bulgarian school. So prior to that, it was just like very basic, but not really in a formal setting. So they don't tell you this. And I think that this is a very important conversation to have with your spouse early on, because it takes away the pressure from assumptions. Like, you don't assume, and it saves you from having arguments later on. It's almost no different than when you have the religion conversation. Especially if you come from two different religions. Like, you don't have this conversation. Some parents don't have this conversation early on, and then they find out later on that, like, for example, I was raised Catholic. You know, my daughter just finished celebrating her first communion. My husband is Christian Orthodox, or his family at least, but he doesn't necessarily believe in a whole lot. So, I mean, that can create friction. Nobody tells you this. I mean, there's so many truths. I feel like I wrote this book for the mom and dad that really like easy information. Like, there are a lot of books out there that just get very overwhelming with the science behind bilingualism and how wonderful, but nobody really tells you the truths, like the real things, the struggles. And that's what I mentioned in this book.
I love it. We got to get a copy of that. Well, I need to get my hands on it. Because I'm kind of at the beginning stages where my daughter's finally forming words, and we're not really forming sentences quite yet, but you know, it's words, and she's got a huge vocabulary. And honestly, I'm not that parent, but I think this girl might even have 4 languages because she understands sign language. And I'm like, whoa, like, but you know, we use Spanish with it, so it's like mas, but she's doing this, and she please, I think, and then there's like a thank you, and I'm probably doing it all wrong, but she's doing it, and I'm just like, I think we're on to 4 languages. I mean, I know she just picks it up from, I think, Miss Rachel, but it's just so interesting to see that. It's fascinating. It really is. Like, you're 14 months old. Like, girl, I can barely speak English some days, you know, and I'm just like, ooh, and I do radio for a living. So it's like, oh boy, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, how did I get here? So question for the parents who neither parent is bilingual. Okay, it's either both. I'm going to use this example here because we're in the U.S., but both are English speakers, right? No bilingual household. Is it still possible to raise a bilingual child?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It is. And usually what ends up happening is going back to the exposure element. Your child is going to need to get that exposure from somewhere. Because if you're just English speakers and your child isn't hearing any other language other than English, then they're likely not going to be bilingual in any language other than English, right? They're just going to be monolingual. What ends up happening is when parents decide that they want their child to speak another language, they have to make the decision for their child to get the exposure somewhere else, from somewhere else. And usually that's either through a nanny or caregiver. that speaks only the minority language to their child. So they'll hire a nanny or sitter or somebody that watches the child only in the minority language. And that way the child gets these 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day in the minority language. Or they'll put them in immersion preschools or immersion schools for that child to get the minority language from somewhere else. Now, there are a number of obviously Spanish is easiest because it's like the most prevalent language, second language anyway, here in the US. There's also immersion for French and other languages, but depending on where you live, you just have to seek out these other resources when the child is young. As the child gets older, it's easier for their online classes. But I would say before 7 years old, really it's crucial for the child to have that hands-on, that one-on-one in the language, whether it's with a caretaker or in a supportive environment. So it is possible. I know of parents that neither of them speak Spanish. Their children are now bilingual. Usually it's because that they started in a preschool or they had a nanny. Then they've evolved and now have their children in immersion schools. And then what becomes a challenge for these parents, because I will say I have to say this, is that because they don't speak the language, it becomes difficult for them to support their child academically. Because like if mom and dad are bringing home, the child is bringing home homework in math and it's all in Spanish and mom and dad don't know what they're looking at, that becomes a challenge to be able to support the child. So what ends up happening is that these parents need to rely on either tutors or friends or other people in their environment to help them support their child. It's not impossible. It just becomes a bit of a challenge. I mean, now we have Google Translate and we have all these apps where you can take the picture and it translates for you and it helps some, but they're not always 100% accurate, which I found. I mean, because I help my daughter with her Bulgarian homework and sometimes it's like, okay, I get it. And sometimes it's like, no, this is like nonsense.
I know the old Google Translate sometimes, even I can tell, I'm like, that's not correct because a native speaker may not say that, or like that's not even like what they're saying. I'm like,
exactly. I mean, and that's the thing also with AI that I have to touch up on is that many parents rely on AI apps and technology is wonderful, but it's a tool and it's not. It shouldn't be used as a go all be all because some of these language apps have mistakes and make mistakes and they may translate things that, or perhaps there are things I'm sure that there are things in Polish that don't have English translations. They're sayings or words that don't exist. So how can an AI translate that feeling or that word when it doesn't exist? Right. So that's another reason why we need to rely on community, friends, tutors, people that can help support us in this journey.
100%. I feel like growing up, and this is also because I come from an immigrant household, but the only benefits or perks, right, I'm using quotation marks, that I ever heard when it came to being bilingual was that, oh, that means you're gonna be able to talk to grandma and it means that you have another language under your belt so you can get a job. Like very, very like, like immigrant family focus answer. Like, my mom thinking of like jobs and like, getting good grades and stuff like that. So I'm asking you, because I feel like obviously like, this is your expertise. Like I'm so happy that we're having this conversation because I think this is so fascinating. What are some of the benefits, obviously besides talking to grandma and then, getting a job, or at least on your resume, right, on the job application, you can say I speak Spanish and English. What are the benefits to being bilingual, right? To raising bilingual children? Like, what are the benefits? Like, how is this good for them? I know it is, but I want to know like the expert level kind of analysis on that.
Well, first, I want to say, besides it looking good on your resume, it actually translates to dollars. So A bilingual person, a bilingual worker on average will earn anywhere from 5% to 20% more money over a monolingual. Now, 5% may not seem like a lot, but if you think about graduating from high school and being bilingual and getting a job and speaking up for yourself, of course, for being bilingual, and making it a point to stress that you are adding more value to the company because you're bilingual, you're likely going to earn more money. If you invest that extra 5% over your lifetime in terms of until you retire, it compounds to thousands, tens of thousands, over $100,000 worth of money. So that little extra 5%, although it doesn't sound like a lot, over a long period of time does translate into a lot of extra money. So there is that financial benefit. The other thing is that companies, we're talking about money, and I'll get to like the social and all the cognitive benefits, but U.S. companies, because we're here in the U.S., U.S. companies will actively seek bilinguals and multilinguals more than any other companies. And when you think about living and working in a global society, right? I mean, how many times have you picked up the phone and you kind of know that you're not speaking to somebody in the U.S., right? But if you think about other companies in other countries hiring you to speak other languages, it kind of flips both ways, right? It's not just the U.S. hiring outside companies to speak English, but other companies can hire Americans to speak other languages, to be involved in these critical roles. And when you talk about language, it's critical when it comes to medical fields, when it comes to fields that really require business fields where you're dealing with global people or people around the world. So it really is a financial benefit. Now, as far as the brain, this is like all the science, right? This is all the fun stuff. Bilinguals tend to have enhanced memory, cognitive function. And one study that they did in babies, which was very fascinating, they had bilingual babies that were exposed to 2 languages. They had one puppet. When a bell sounded, one puppet appeared on one side. The babies would turn and look to that puppet, right? Only the bilingual babies, when they switched the puppet to the other side and dinged, only the bilingual babies turned to the other side to see where that puppet was. Only the bilingual babies. So
wow.
This means that their brain is working a little bit extra, right? So they're making extra connections. Being bilingual also, new studies have shown that it has delayed early onset symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So in patients, this is like as you become older, being bilingual ourselves, you and me, that we're a little bit older, this is great benefit for us because being just the fact that we're bilingual, it can delay the early onset of all of these Alzheimer's symptoms. So there are many benefits, including how now they've discovered how it's helping even autistic children. So there's so many benefits to in terms of the brain function in bilinguals. Now, aside from that, the social impacts are really great. So especially in Latino kids and bilingual Hispanic children, studies have shown that when they have a stronger connection to family and language and identity is tied to language, to family, to all of this, they have a higher confidence level. And that's crucial in teenagers. This was a study that they did. So these are all benefits to being bilingual that I think far surpass just us putting forth that a little extra effort.
I 100% agree. I didn't realize how transformative that really is for a child's experience just in life. And I always say too, and I mean, I could just be saying this because I'm just me, but I'm always like, I kind of feel like even having like knowing two languages, right? So Polish and English for me, I feel like I even see the world in a different light or a different way. And I can't describe exactly what that means, but I'm like, I think I just see things different, like than somebody who just maybe speaks one language. Maybe I'm crazy, but I'm like, I feel like maybe because I can connect to a whole different group of people. I'm not really sure, but I'm like, I see the world differently and I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps you definitely build empathy and just be more culturally aware. And then something fun is that another study that they've made recently is that people that are bilingual may have dual personalities. So you may have a personality in one language because it's tied to a culture and nuance in one language versus having another personality in another language. So it's kind of interesting, right? That you can even have like this kind of dual personality based on the languages that you speak.
100%. And honestly, I think I kind of believe that because I remember in high school, I went to a predominantly Hispanic high school, so it was a lot of Spanish speaking natives. And I even noticed the way they spoke, even tone was softer in Spanish. I was like, interesting. But you're right. No, I absolutely believe that, and I think that's very true. So now I have a quick question, kind of for you to give tips to other moms, right? So you've built, a brand, a business, obviously a podcast, and you've really kind of like dove into this. And I think it's just so incredible. So what advice do you have when other moms, right, when they're feeling kind of torn between ambition and parenting, right? They want to build the brand, they want to build their podcast, they want to do pretty much exactly what you're doing, but also being a mom just like you are, right? What kind of advice do you give to a mom that might feel kind of torn?
So I'm going to pass this advice forward. And this was a piece of advice that I listened to from Chalene Johnson. I don't know if you know Chalene Johnson. Chalene Johnson is a podcaster. She's a marketer. She's built multi-million-dollar businesses over the years. She started out in fitness. And she's also a mom. Now her kids are married and they're grown. But one thing that stuck to me, and I've been listening to her, I used to listen to her a lot more, but years ago when I first discovered her, something really stood out. And she said, if you are a parent, if you are a mom, and you're starting a business, know that you're going to have all the time in the world to build your business, but you're not going to have all the time in the world to see your children grow. Mm-hmm. So she said, if you're going to prioritize, you're not going to get those years back when they're babies, when they're toddlers, but you can get that time back later on. So that really stuck with me because I've always been very ambitious, very driven, very, you can say workaholic, but it really stuck with me because she said it may take you longer to get there, but it's going to be far more rewarding because you're not going to feel that guilt, right? So for me, I started Milegasi in 2017. So we're going on 8 years now. And I feel like I'm just like beginning to scratch the surface of where I want to be. But I always make it a point to prioritize my daughter and to make sure that I am there for her game. She plays hockey, that I am there to pick her up, that I am there to take her to practices, that I am there to do all of this. So she becomes a priority. Now, what that also means is that there are sacrifices that I have to make. And that means that I'm usually up very early in the morning if I have to work or have something important, or I am up very late working sometimes. Sometimes on a Sunday, if my husband is taking over for the day and he's taking her out to a game, that means that my Sunday means I'm going to work. And I'm going to plan my week. So it just means that you have to prioritize what's important to you. And only you can make that choice. Every mom is different. Every parent is different. So think about what do you prioritize in your life? What do you want your focus to be? And then know that, yes, it may take a little longer. Believe me, It's not easy when you see people that started with you all of a sudden have like 20,000, 30,000 followers and their business is booming, or, it's hard. And here I am, like barely with just under 5,000 followers, on Instagram, or, and I'm working at it 8 years, but that's okay. I try not to compare. And I try to just stay in my lane, and I know what my journey is looking like, and I'm okay with that.
Absolutely. I love that advice. Yeah, we got to stop comparing it, especially to other moms. I'm like, when it comes to my parenting, my business, when it comes to my job, my full-time radio job, I'm like, I'm not comparing. Like, first of all, this shit is so hard. And I'm not going to make it harder on myself. But I love that advice. So what is next for you? Kind of as far as the podcast and then obviously running your business. Are you going to be doing more? Because you do a lot of talks, right? Within like corporate settings too, like you mentioned Google. What's kind of next? What's coming up for you? All that good stuff.
Well, it's very exciting. So what's immediately coming up next before the end of the year and in the fall is I am relaunching my course, my online course. And that's my Confident Bilingual Parenting course. I launched it about 2.5 years ago. And it was great at the time, but I feel like now there's just more information. I'm including information on AI tools and just really updating it based on feedback that I've gotten from the moms and the parents that have taken the course. So I'm excited to relaunch that in the fall. And then I'm really excited to begin doing more workshops. I feel like that's where I love workshops. I love one-on-one talking with people and feeding off of the energy of people and empowering parents. So I definitely want to do more of that. So that would be the plan for the fall and then the coming year.
I love it. Well, we're so excited to keep, in touch with you, keep obviously following you on social and your website as well, which I believe you'll be able to plug it, but I'm also going to put it all in the show notes. So where can we follow you on Instagram, and what is your website?
So on Instagram, it's Milegasi, spelled Milegasi. That's also on Threads, which has been a lot of fun recently. Pretty much everywhere on Pinterest, I think it's also Milegasi. That's pretty much the handle on all social media. And then the .com is milegasi.com. And there they can find the blog. You can find the podcast and all the previous episodes. You can find links to the course. And you can also sign up for the newsletter where I have right now a 50+ page bilingual pack, free download. So when you sign up, you can just get that download. And that's great for kids that are 2 to 7, filled with bilingual Spanish activities.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Paulina. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.